Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Widows from 2018. Now, I don't actually remember ever hearing about this film about the time it released, and although, trying to read up on these things after the fact is always a tricky thing, it appears that part of it was releasing during a busy release period and some kind of poor marketing. It didn't get a lot of viewership. It did okay. It made its money back. And I have rarely ever heard anyone mention it before until a couple of weeks ago. Somebody mentioned it in passing, noting something about a character or a scene in the movie. And I was like, I had never heard of that. Let me go find out what that's about. So it turns out it's available on Amazon through their free ad supported viewing, and it is I would call this an underrated gem. This is really interesting. It's an interesting movie on a lot of levels. It's directed by Steve McQueen, who's and it's co-written by him and Gillian Flynn, of Gone Girl fame and whatnot. And I don't really know his I don't think I've watched any of his movies before, but he is generally lauded as being a very good director and has gotten quite a few awards for his directing before. This is interesting that it kind of fell through the cracks because there are a lot of really good things going for this movie. And this movie does a lot of things better than a lot of much more famous and well-selling films. This is ostensibly a heist movie, except not really. And I think that may be in conjunction with whatever problems it had in its marketing and release. I can understand why some people might feel kind of middling or put off by this movie, but I think it's really fascinating. It does a lot of things really, really well and with a surprising amount of deftness. This easily could have been a completely botched, confusing mess because of all the things it's trying to do at the same time, in addition to any number of other production problems it could have had. But it really comes together in a surprisingly satisfying synthesis by the end. The main plot appears to be about a series of heists or the lives of several people in various forms of criminality and the people that they have relationships with. But in reality, this is a movie that to me is much more about the relationships than it is about the action and the heisting. And I think if you go into this really wanting a satisfying heist film, even if it differs a little bit from the norm of heist films, I think you might come out a little disappointed. But I was it has a very smooth transition. You're not offered a heist film and then denied it. It's really mostly about the lead up, a series of events that transpire, then the ramifications of those for a substantial part of the film, and then a climactic set of actions that are more traditional to the sort of action, crime, heist movie genre. But what's way more interesting is the part in between, which takes up a substantial amount of the runtime, which is the relationships between a variety of characters and a variety of power dynamics. And it has a lot of, I hesitate to say subtle, but not overt commentary on the state of politics and economics and race relations. And all of these could be things that it could have done really sloppily or with a heavy hand. Because a lot of the things that the movie ends up saying in its subtext could be written really sloppily. You could have, a lot of tropified characters who don't have a lot of actual depth, who are just, these, a very like, somebody out of an 80s film is basically how I'm going to put it without spoiling any specifics about any specific characters. The actual hook of the film, I don't think it's a spoiler to say because, it is the very first part of the film and also it's in the name, is that the main characters that we follow are the widows and a couple of associates of a bunch of men who were in a heist that didn't go well. And I won't get into any of the specifics there, but what's really interesting is how that easily could have immediately gone wrong, of having the women be downtrodden and incapable, or gone the other way. And I'm going to point at Ocean's 7, 8, whatever that movie was that to me is completely unmemorable, not awful, but not memorable at all, where it's just the Ocean series glorifies crime and heisting in a way that kind of doesn't work after a while, and especially in the current era. And Ocean's 8, where it was a mess of a film where you ended up with a lot of very tropified characters who didn't really have a lot of believable personality. This could have easily gone that way, and it is very careful not to, because it presents some very believable characters who are not defined, who are influenced by, but not defined by the relationships they have and had, and their experiences and their inward and outward appearances. It does a lot of mixing and matching with some typical sort of character archetypes, so that you don't have such tropified characters. I feel like I'm going in circles a little bit, but the idea being that, like, these are believable characters, and the way they relate to each other and the way that they relate to the people who may be trying to help them or maybe against them or maybe some of both is really, really solid. It never feels like the movie is trying to tug too hard at your heartstrings or make you feel like somebody is in need of pity or in need of like cheering on necessarily. It's a very self-contained set of character dynamics, and I think it works really, really well. I want to talk about it more, but if I talk about it extensively, I'm going to ruin the film, and I don't think anybody's really seen this film, so I highly recommend it. The emotional dynamics are really the strong suit of the film, where you have a lot of characters with depth and motivation, but you also have a lot of emotions that are coming from believable places and given adequate context to understand how they are influencing the characters, and also both positively and negatively, and motivating them towards or against certain actions. And there's credit that needs to be given to all of the actors. This is an ensemble cast with quite a variety of actors in terms of experience. There's some, people who have been around for 50 years, and there are some people who are brand new. And while not everybody on this cast I would consider to be a great actor, including a couple of our main stars, I don't think they fall into the camp I always talk about of they really only play like versions of themselves, and that's fine, but the casting is done so well, and the direction is done such that I think the casting is really solid, and all of the characters put on very believable performances, to the point that some people whose casting I was worried about actually showed showed up, and I was worried I would only see them as somebody they had played before, basically, because I was worried about their depth of capability. But even if they didn't have a huge amount of acting flexibility or acting dynamics, the way they were woven into the story and the way they were directed worked perfectly to get across the character and the emotion that was needed in those situations. As far as the actual production goes, okay, I need to talk about the tone and the pacing a little bit, because there's so much going on in this film, and I almost want some of it to be cut out, but I cannot pinpoint any particular part of it that could reasonably be cut out without losing a substantial amount of the structure. I will say that they could have taken a turn near the end, still landed at the same ending point, but concluded the sort of climactic, or executed the climactic scene in a completely different and less distracting way. And I think it would have possibly worked better, but you couldn't remove it entirely by any means. Because there's so much going on, there's so many characters, there's so many dynamics, and it takes its time to actually show the characters' experiences and growth, it does end up feeling a little bit cluttered, a little bit rushed, a little bit like it doesn't have quite enough breathing room. I don't think that stretching this movie out to 3 hours would have fixed that. I think that's just the nature of the beast, that there was so much going on that you sort of had to cut it up a little bit in some places to ensure that the pacing continues. Because if they slowed it down, I think some of the other parts of the film would have become less compelling as a result. As far as the actual production goes, cinematography and the film composition in general is very, very good. There are a couple of scenes where there's some color grading or some issues with lighting where it was like a little too dark, where I think they could have pulled it back a little bit, made it a little bit more legible. But so much of the rest of the film is visually so well produced that those few scenes where it has those problems are pretty limited. So I can't really ding it too much for that. It's a few outstanding ones. I do think it falls a little bit in general towards the mid late 2000s 2010s problem of being a little bit too cool hued in its color grading, kind of across the board. But I don't think it is done to such excess that it actively hurts the film. It's more just me personally being tired of that color grading, having watched so many things from that era. So I'm not gonna ding it for that. The audio is also really well done. There's some really good musical selections, musical compositions directly for the film, and a lot of the audio editing, sound effects and whatnot is really, really well done. Again, there are a few things here and there that are awkward, or just like a little too loud or a little too quiet, but none of them stick out so much that I can even pinpoint them right now, having watched it yesterday. So like on the whole, I think the production is really solid. So as far as like, I don't want to dig into this film too much because I will ruin it. If you are interested in a heist genre film that isn't going to succumb to a lot of the same pitfalls that heist films have for the last 20 years, let's say, where it's a little bit more realistic, a little bit more, a little bit less silly, a little bit less comedic. It's not a comedy film. It's pretty serious. It still has good pacing, and that it relies a lot more on character dynamics and character growth. Then I think you'll be really interested in this. I can't really compare it to much else because it's got so much going on and it does so many things very well. And it definitely redoubles my interest in seeing some of the things that I have on my to watch list from Steve McQueen. And hope that like there are some new ideas coming in. Caveat on that, actually, I didn't find out until I was skimming the Wikipedia article. This is actually based on a British mini series from the 80s, I believe, which is weird. And I have to imagine, like, obviously can only take so much from that, since the actual plot line and the things that this movie interrogates, like culturally and socially, are profoundly American. It's just it's really interesting. It's really solid. It has a lot to say. It doesn't slap you in the face with it. And it's just a really entertaining film. Anyway, I think that's about what I'm going to say on it for now. And I hope you'll check it out. It is free to watch at the moment. Anyway, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been your host, the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys for something a little spooky next time.